September 30th, 1944. Eschweiler, Germany, 3 miles from the Siegfried Line. Captain James Burt stood in the commander's cupola of his M10 tank destroyer, watching as flatbed trucks rolled into the battalion staging area, carrying something his crews had been promised for months, but never believed would actually arrive. The new machines sat chained to the trailers, their turrets larger than anything he'd seen on American armor, their gun barrels stretching nearly 25 feet from breech to muzzle brake. They looked wrong, somehow, top-heavy and ungainly compared to the sleek M10 Wolverines his 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion had been fighting with since July. His executive officer, Lieutenant Frank Audiss, climbed down from one of the trucks and walked toward Burt's position, carrying a technical manual still wrapped in brown paper. "Sir, they're really here. 14 M36, fresh from the depot at Liege. Command says, we're converting the entire first company starting today." Burt took the manual and tore open the wrapper. 90mm gun motor carriage M36, he read aloud. The specifications were impressive on paper. The 90mm M-dry gun, adapted from anti-aircraft artillery, with a muzzle velocity of 2,650 feet per second. Armor-piercing capability rated at 129 millimeters of penetration at 500 yards. Maximum range over 21,000 yards. But those numbers meant nothing against the reality Burt had been living since crossing into Germany 2 weeks earlier. His battalion had encountered Panther tanks 3 times in September. Each engagement followed the same pattern. His M10's 3-inch gun would fire at ranges under 1,000 yards. The rounds would strike the Panther's sloped frontal armor, and absolutely nothing would happen. The German tanks would rotate their turrets with mechanical precision and return fire with 75mm guns that could penetrate American armor from any angle at any range. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The 703rd had lost 11 M10s in combat since landing in France on July 1st. 43 men dead or wounded. Every after-action report said the same thing. Avoid frontal engagement with Panthers and Tigers. Use speed and positioning to attack from the flank or rear. Accept casualties to achieve favorable tactical geometry. The doctrine made sense when you accepted that American tank destroyers were fundamentally outgunned by German heavy armor. But doctrine was written by men who'd never watched their friends burn alive in vehicles that couldn't hurt the enemy. Burt had begun to suspect that American equipment wasn't inadequate. It was that no one had bothered to give them weapons capable of fighting the war they were actually in, rather than the war planners had imagined back in 1942. The M36 was supposed to change that. At least, that's what the technical bulletin claimed. The 90mm gun could allegedly penetrate Panther frontal armor at combat ranges, could defeat Tigers at medium distance, could, theoretically, allow American tank destroyer crews to engage German heavy armor without relying on flanking maneuvers that cost American lives. Burt's gunner, Sergeant William McIntyre, walked the perimeter of the nearest M36, running his hand along the turret armor. "Captain, this thing's got an open top, just like our M10, no overhead protection at all. And look at this turret, it's huge. Must be 7 feet tall from the turret ring to the top of the gun mount." The sergeant was right. The M36 turret was massive, designed to accommodate the 90mm gun's recoil mechanism and the larger ammunition it fired. But the designers had kept the open-topped configuration that characterized all American tank destroyers, a weight-saving measure that left the crew exposed to artillery fragments, small arms fire, and the elements. German tanks had fully enclosed turrets with armor overhead. American doctrine sacrificed protection for mobility and observation. McIntyre climbed into the turret and examined the gun's breech mechanism. The sighting equipment looks identical to what we've got in the M10. M36 telescopic sight, same magnification, same field of view. But the gun's got this massive counterweight on the back of the turret, must weigh a ton. 14 M36, to replace 14 M10 Wolverines. The mechanics worked through the night, transferring ammunition, radios, personal gear, everything that made these machines functional rather than just mobile gun platforms. By dawn on October 1st, Burt's company was equipped with the most powerful American tank destroyers that had ever reached the European theatre. Training began immediately, but there was no time for the methodical instruction American forces had enjoyed back in the States. The Siegfried Line sat 3 miles east, and intelligence reported German armour concentrations forming behind the defensive fortifications. The 703rd would be in combat within days, probably hours. Crews had to learn the 36 systems while preparing for battle. The 90mm guns operation was more complex than the 3-inch weapon Burt's crews had been firing since July. The M-dry gun used separate loading ammunition, meaning the propellant charge and the projectile were loaded as 2 distinct components. The loader had to first chamber the projectile, then insert the brass cartridge case containing the propellant, then close the breech. Only then could the gunner fire. The sequence added seconds to each shot, reducing rate of fire compared to the fixed ammunition used in the 3-inch gun. But the projectile itself was formidable. The M82 armour-piercing capped round weighed 24 pounds, with a muzzle velocity that created kinetic energy far exceeding anything the M10 could achieve. The armour-piercing cap was designed to prevent the hardened steel projectile from shattering against sloped armour, a problem that had plagued American tank destroyers when engaging Panthers at shallow angles. In theory, the M82 could defeat any German armour at combat ranges. In practice, no one in 1st Battalion had fired the weapon in combat. The gun's recoil was violent. During test firing at the depot range on October 2nd, the M36's entire hull rocked backward when McIntyre triggered the first shot. The muzzle blast was enormous, creating a pressure wave that kicked up dust and debris in a semicircle, extending 30 yards from the tank destroyer's position. The noise was physically painful, a sharp crack that left Burt's ears ringing even through his tanker's helmet. Worse, the muzzle blast obscured vision completely. A massive cloud of smoke and dust billowed from the gun's muzzle, blocking the gunner's view through the telescopic sight for several seconds after each shot. This meant the crew couldn't observe the impact point or adjust their aim immediately, a serious tactical limitation when engaging moving targets or multiple enemies in rapid succession. McIntyre climbed out of the turret after the 3rd test shot, his face covered in powder residue. "Sir, this gun hits like a sledgehammer, but we're blind after every shot. Can't see if we've hit or missed until the smoke clears, and by then the target might have moved. Germans won't just sit there while we're trying to figure out if we need a second shot." The problem was well known to the Ordnance Department. A solution was already in production, a double-baffle muzzle brake that would redirect propellant gases to the sides rather than directly forward, reducing both recoil and muzzle blast. But those muzzle brakes wouldn't reach Europe until November. For now, 1st Battalion would fight with Mexome Dreissigs that blinded their crews after every shot. October 10th, 1944. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion received orders to support 3rd Armoured Division's advance toward the Roer River. Intelligence reported German armour in the sector, including confirmed sightings of Panther tanks and at least 1 Tiger. This would be 1st Battalion's first combat action with the M36. Burt's company moved into position before dawn, occupying hull-down positions along a ridgeline overlooking open farmland that stretched toward the German defensive lines. The M36 were positioned with only their turrets visible above the crest, presenting minimal target profiles while maintaining clear fields of fire across the approaches. Standard tank destroyer doctrine: occupy prepared positions, wait for German armour to advance into kill zones, engage from concealment. The morning fog was thick, reducing visibility to less than 400 yards. Burt scanned the terrain through his binoculars, watching for movement. His loader, Private James Tarbell, had prepared 5 rounds of M82 armour-piercing ammunition, arranging them within easy reach. McIntyre sat in the gunner's position, eye pressed to the M6 F site, traversing the turret slowly as he memorized landmarks and range estimates for different sectors of their field of fire. At 0643, the fog began to lift. What emerged from the mist made Burt's breath catch in his throat. A column of German armour, moving in tactical formation across the farmland 800 yards from his position. He counted quickly. 5 Panthers, moving at approximately 15 miles per hour, their 75mm guns traversing as they advanced. This was exactly the scenario American doctrine said to avoid. 5 Panthers in a frontal engagement, at a range where the M10's 3-inch gun would be completely ineffective. But Burt's company wasn't equipped with M10s anymore. They had M36. They had 90mm guns that were supposed to be able to do this. He keyed his radio. All Cobra units, this is Cobra 6. Enemy armour in Sector Charlie, range 800 yards, 5 Panthers in column formation. Prepare to engage on my command. Target assignment, Cobra 1, lead vehicle. Cobra 2, second vehicle. Cobra 3, third vehicle. Acknowledge. His platoon leaders confirming they had targets, confirming they were ready to fire. Burt took a deep breath. This was the moment. Either the technical bulletins and test reports were accurate, and the M36 could do what no other American tank destroyer had managed, or they were about to discover they'd been given another inadequate weapon to die with. All Cobra units, fire at will. McIntyre's first shot was perfect. The 90mm gun roared, the M36 hull rocking, backward from the recoil. The muzzle blast created exactly the problem they'd anticipated, a massive cloud of smoke that completely obscured Burt's view of the target. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, he couldn't see anything. The smoke drifted sideways in the morning breeze, and when it cleared, the lead Panther wasn't moving. Burt focused his binoculars. The Panther's glacis plate, the heavily sloped frontal armour that made German medium tanks so formidable, showed a penetration. Not just a hit, a complete penetration. The M82 round had punched through 80mm of sloped armour and destroyed something critical inside the vehicle. Black smoke was already pouring from the engine compartment. The crew was bailing out, abandoning their vehicle without returning fire. Across the ridgeline, the other M36 were firing. The characteristic sharp crack of 90mm guns echoed through the valley, each shot followed by that frustrating cloud of obscuring smoke. But when the smoke cleared, the results were undeniable. The second Panther was burning. The third showed visible damage to its turret. The fourth and fifth were attempting to reverse, pulling back toward the German lines. McIntyre was already loading a second round, his movements quick and precise despite the cramped turret. Target number 4, range 800 yards, moving left to right. Burt called the shot. The gunner traversed, tracking the retreating Panther through his sight. On target, fire! The second shot hit the Panther's side armour as it attempted to manoeuvre away from the engagement. The result was catastrophic. The entire turret lifted slightly from the hull as ammunition inside the vehicle detonated. Secondary explosions followed, each one more violent than the last. The Panther stopped moving, transformed in seconds from a functional war machine into a burning wreck. The entire engagement lasted less than 4 minutes. 5 German Panthers, vehicles that American tank destroyer doctrine said should never be engaged frontally, destroyed by 3 M36 firing from prepared positions at 800 yards range. 0 American casualties, 0 friendly vehicles lost. The exchange ratio was perfect. Burt keyed his radio to battalion headquarters. Cobra 6 to Hawk Base. 5 enemy Panthers destroyed in Sector Charlie. All friendly units operational. No casualties. The M36 performs as advertised. Recommend immediate commitment of remaining battalion assets. The radio crackled with the battalion commander's response, Lieutenant Colonel James Prentice. Cobra 6, Hawk Base. Confirm 5 Panthers destroyed. Well done. All companies are converting to M36 as of today. That 90mm gun just changed how we fight this war. But even as Burt acknowledged the transmission, even as his crew began celebrating their first engagement with the new equipment, he was thinking about the muzzle blast problem. They'd gotten lucky today. The Panthers had been advancing in column formation, predictable targets at a known range. In a fluid battle, against multiple enemies at varying ranges, that smoke cloud after every shot could be fatal. The M36 could kill Panthers, that much was proven. But the weapon system had limitations that doctrine hadn't fully addressed. The Ordnance Department knew about the muzzle blast issue because they'd been studying 90mm guns since 1942. The entire M36 program was born from the realization that American anti-tank weapons were becoming obsolete even as they entered production, a problem rooted in the fundamental miscalculation about what kind of war America would be fighting in Europe. In 1940, when American tank destroyer doctrine was developed, the primary threat was expected to be German Panzer III and Panzer IV, medium tanks with armor thickness ranging from 30 to 50 millimeters. Against those targets, a 3-inch gun firing at 1,500 feet per second was perfectly adequate. American planners expected mobile warfare, where speed and positioning would be more important than raw penetrating power. But the Germans had upgraded their tank designs faster than American intelligence predicted. By 1942, the Panzer IV had been up-armored to 80 millimeters on the frontal glacis. The Panther, introduced in 1943, had sloped armor equivalent to 140 millimeters of perpendicular protection. The Tiger, though less common, mounted 100 millimeters of flat armor on the frontal hull. American 3-inch guns couldn't defeat these vehicles at combat ranges. The solution was obvious: develop a more powerful anti-tank gun. But the engineering challenges were substantial. Simply scaling up the 3-inch gun wasn't feasible, because the recoil forces would exceed what existing tank destroyer chassis could absorb. A completely new weapon system was needed, and the most promising candidate was the Anther 90mm anti-aircraft gun that the Army had been deploying since 1940. The 90mm Mines anti-aircraft gun was a formidable weapon in its original role, capable of engaging aircraft at altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet with proximity-fused ammunition. The gun's ballistic performance was excellent: high muzzle velocity, flat trajectory, accuracy at extreme range. In September 1942, the Ordnance Department issued specifications for a new mount that would allow the 90mm gun to depress below the horizontal, making it capable of engaging ground targets. This became the 90mm Mezwai gun, standardized in May 1943. But mounting an anti-aircraft gun on a mobile chassis presented unique challenges. The 90mm Mines weighed over 19,000 pounds with its mounting hardware, far too heavy for any existing tank destroyer chassis. The gun's recoil was tremendous, requiring sophisticated buffering systems to prevent structural damage to the vehicle. And the ammunition was large and heavy, 24-pound projectiles that required separate loading and took up significant storage space. The 73 prototype, tested in March 1943, was the first attempt to mount the 90mm gun on a tank destroyer chassis. Engineers used the M10's hull as the base, combining it with a newly designed turret large enough to accommodate the gun's recoil mechanism. The prototype worked, barely. The turret was cramped. The ammunition stowage was inadequate. The vehicle was nose-heavy, affecting handling. But the fundamental concept was proven. A 90mm gun could be mounted on a mobile tracked chassis. Testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground in summer 1943 validated the 73's anti-tank capabilities. Against captured German armor plate samples, the 90mm M82 armor-piercing round penetrated 129mm at 500 yards, 122mm at 1,000 yards. This was sufficient to defeat Panther frontal armor at all combat ranges and Tiger frontal armor at ranges exceeding 500 yards. The gun's performance matched the German 88mm K 36 gun mounted in Tiger I tanks, finally giving American forces a weapon that could engage German heavy armor frontally. But procurement was slow. In November 1943, the Ordnance Department authorized limited production of 500 73 tank destroyers. The designation changed to M36 in June 1944, but actual deliveries to combat units didn't begin until September. The delay cost American lives. Throughout the Normandy campaign in June and July 1944, American tank destroyer battalions fought German Panthers and Tigers with 3-inch guns that couldn't penetrate frontal armor at any range. Casualties mounted. Doctrine adapted around the equipment's limitations, accepting that American forces would take losses to achieve favorable engagement geometry. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion was one of the first units to receive M36 in October 1944, but only because they were already in combat in Germany, and their casualty rates demanded immediate equipment upgrades. By late October, only 7 battalions had converted to the M36. The rest continued fighting with M10 Wolverines, armed with 3-inch guns, or M10 Hellcats, armed with 76mm guns that performed only marginally better against heavy German armor. Captain Burt understood the institutional inertia that had delayed the M36 deployment. American industry was magnificent at producing equipment in quantity, but terrible at responding to changing battlefield requirements. Once production lines were established, changing them was expensive and time-consuming. The M10 program represented billions of dollars in investment, thousands of vehicles, already manufactured. Admitting those vehicles were inadequate meant acknowledging a massive waste of resources and, more painfully, acknowledging that American soldiers had died using equipment that was obsolete before it left the factory. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The M36 combat debut in October had proven the weapon's potential, but also revealed its limitations. The muzzle blast problem was serious enough that crews reported difficulty maintaining situational awareness during sustained engagements. The open-topped turret, while providing excellent observation, left crews vulnerable to artillery fragments and small arms fire, and the vehicle's relatively thin armor, identical to the M10 it replaced, meant the M36 couldn't survive frontal engagements with German tank guns. But none of those limitations mattered as much as the fundamental capability the M36 provided, the ability to kill Panthers and Tigers at range. For 19 months, from the North African campaign in November 1942 through the Normandy breakout in August 1944, American forces had faced German heavy armor without adequate weapons to defeat it. Doctrine had adapted, tactics had evolved, but the underlying reality remained that American tank destroyers couldn't hurt the enemy in frontal combat. The M36 changed that calculation. Not perfectly, not without cost, but decisively. By November 1944, word was spreading through American armored units that there was finally a weapon that could fight German Panthers on equal terms. October 27, 1944. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion's headquarters company prepared a detailed after-action review of the M36's first month in combat. The report, classified secret and distributed to Ordnance Department officials and senior commanders throughout the European theatre, provided the first comprehensive assessment of the 90mm gun's combat effectiveness. The statistics were impressive. In 27 separate engagements against German armor between October 1st and October 27th, M36 from the 703rd had destroyed 43 enemy vehicles. The breakdown was specific: 28 Panthers, 9 Panzer IVs, 4 Tigers, and 2 Stuggy 3 assault guns. American losses during the same period were 3 M36 destroyed, 2 damaged, and returned to service. Crew casualties were 12 men wounded, 2 killed. The exchange ratio exceeded 15-1 in favor of American forces. More importantly, the report analyzed engagement ranges. The M630 had achieved kills against Panthers at ranges from 400 yards to an extraordinary 4,200 yards. The longest range kill was credited to Corporal Anthony Pinto, who'd hit a Panther at a range that exceeded the maximum effective distance of the M630F telescopic sight. Lieutenant Alfred Rose had destroyed another Panther at 4,600 yards, literally at the maximum range where the sight could even acquire a target. These extreme range kills were anomalies, flukes of perfect conditions and exceptional gunnery, but they demonstrated that the 90mm gun's ballistics allowed engagement of German armour at distances where return fire was unlikely. Even more routine engagements showed the M630 could reliably destroy Panthers at 800 to 1200 yards, ranges where the 3-inch gun had been completely ineffective. The report's technical section addressed the muzzle blast problem directly. The 90mm M-dry gun produces excessive smoke and blast upon firing, obscuring the gunner's vision through the M630 F sight for approximately 3 to 4 seconds. This limitation reduces rate of sustained fire and makes adjustment of subsequent shots difficult. Crews report frustration at inability to observe impact points immediately after firing. Tactical workaround is to assign assistant gunner or tank commander to observe impacts using binoculars from outside the sight picture. This is partially effective, but adds complexity to crew coordination during combat. The report recommended immediate deployment of the double baffle muzzle brake that was already in production. Installation of improved muzzle brake is critical to maximize M630 effectiveness in sustained combat. Current muzzle blast characteristics are acceptable for single-target engagement, but create serious limitations during multiple target scenarios or when engaging moving targets at extended range. But even with its limitations, the report's conclusion was unambiguous. The M630 Jackson represents the first American tank destroyer capable of engaging German Panther and Tiger tanks frontally at combat ranges with high probability of kill. Crews express high confidence in the weapon system. Morale has improved significantly compared to previous operations with M10 Wolverine. Recommend maximum priority for conversion of all Tank Destroyer Battalions to M630 standard as production allows. The recommendation reached the desk of Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges, commanding 1st Army, in early November. Hodges reviewed casualty statistics for Tank Destroyer Battalions operating with M10 Wolverines compared to those using M630 Jacksons. The difference was stark. Battalions equipped with M10s were suffering casualties at nearly triple the rate of M630-equipped units when engaging similar German forces. The M630's ability to engage German armour at extended range meant American crews could destroy enemy vehicles before coming under effective return fire. Hodges ordered accelerated conversion of all Tank Destroyer Battalions under 1st Army Command to M630 standard. This created immediate logistics challenges as production of the M630 hadn't been planned at the scale now required. In June 1944, when the M630 was standardized, projected procurement was 500 vehicles. After Normandy, that estimate increased to 600. By November, 1st Army alone was requesting 1,400 M630, a number that exceeded total production through early 1945. The solution was improvisation. General Motors' Fisher Tank Arsenal, which had been producing M10 tank destroyers, received orders to convert existing M10 hulls to M630 standard by replacing the 3-inch gun turret with the new 90mm turret. This conversion program began in April 1944, but had been moving slowly. Now it was given maximum priority. Simultaneously, production began on the M630 Beins variant, which mounted the M630 turret on MV Ardrei Sherman tank chassis to address the shortage of M9's hulls available for conversion. By December 1944, production rate reached approximately 100 M36 per month across all variants. This was far below the numbers needed to re-equip all American tank destroyer battalions, but it allowed selective deployment to units engaged in the heaviest combat against German armour. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, as one of the first units to receive and combat test the M36, became a training resource for other battalions converting to the new equipment. In mid-November, Captain Burt travelled to 3rd Army's Tank Destroyer School at Nancy, France, to brief instructors and student crews on M36 combat tactics based on his company's experience. His presentation was brutally practical. The 90mm gun can kill Panthers at 1,000 yards every single time if you hit them. That's the good news. The bad news is you're blind after every shot for 4 seconds. Work around it. Have your TC. Observe through binos while the gunner's reacquiring through the sight. Call corrections immediately. If you're engaging multiple targets, prioritize. Kill the closest threat first, then work outward. Don't try to engage 3 targets in rapid succession because you won't be able to see if you're hitting anything. He addressed the armour question directly. The M36 has the same armour as the M10, 57mm on the front slope, 19mm on the turret. That will not stop a Panther or Tiger round at any range. You cannot trade shots with German heavy armour and survive. Use the 90mm range advantage. Engage from beyond effective return fire distance. If they close to under 600 yards, you're in serious trouble. Withdraw or maneuver. Never sit still and slug it out. These were men who'd been fighting German armour with inadequate weapons for months. They'd lost friends to Panthers they couldn't hurt. The M36 represented hope that American equipment could finally match German performance, but Burt's message tempered that hope with reality. The M36 was better, significantly better, but it wasn't invincible. One more thing, Burt added at the end of his briefing. The Germans know about the M36 now. They've captured at least 2 of them that I know about. They're analysing the gun, the armour, the systems. They'll adapt. They'll change tactics. Don't expect the advantages we have now to last forever. Use them while you've got them. This proved prophetic. By late November, German tactical doctrine began emphasizing longer engagement ranges against American forces, specifically to counter the M36 threat. German tank commanders received instructions to engage at ranges exceeding 1,500 yards when possible, distances where even the 90mm gun's accuracy degraded. German defensive positions were prepared with clear fields of fire extending beyond 2,000 yards, forcing American armour to cross open ground under observation before closing to effective range. The tactical chess match was evolving. The M36 had given American forces a weapon capable of defeating German heavy armour frontally, but doctrine and employment still lagged behind the equipment's capabilities. Tank destroyer battalions were still organised and trained for the fluid, mobile warfare that American planners had expected. The reality of combat in Germany was different. Prepared, defensive positions, limited manoeuvre space, engagement ranges that favoured the defender. December 16, 1944. The radio call came through to 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion headquarters at 0543. All units, this is Hawk Base. Enemy offensive in progress. Multiple armoured formations moving through Ardennes sector. All battalions report to designated assembly areas immediately. This is not a drill. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. German forces, concentrated in secret over the previous month, launched the largest offensive the Wehrmacht would mount in the West during the entire war. 29 divisions, including 10 Panzer and Panzergrenadier divisions, supported by nearly 1,000 tanks and assault guns. The offensive struck along a 75-mile front through Belgium and Luxembourg, targeting American positions held by divisions that were either recuperating from earlier battles or newly arrived and inexperienced. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion was attached to 1st Infantry Division, positioned in the northern shoulder of the German breakthrough. As German spearheads pushed west, attempting to reach the Meuse River crossings, they encountered American defensive positions that included M36-equipped tank destroyer battalions. The result would become case studies in tank destroyer employment. At Elsenborn Ridge, M36 from the 703rd occupied hull-down positions overlooking the approaches German armour had to use to bypass the ridge complex. The terrain was ideal for defence: clear fields of fire extending over 2,000 yards, limited approach routes that far-channeled attacking forces into predetermined kill zones, supporting infantry that could protect tank destroyers from German infantry infiltration. December 20th, 0715. Captain Burt's company, now with full complement of 14 M36 after replacements arrived in early December, observed German armour assembling for an assault on American positions. Through his binoculars, Burt counted over 20 tanks, Panthers primarily, with at least 3 Tigers identifiable by their massive turrets and wider tracks. This was exactly the scenario tank destroyer doctrine was built around: massed German armour advancing against prepared American positions. The engagement began at extreme range. At 1,800 yards, the M36 opened fire, targeting the lead elements of the German formation. At this distance, accuracy was marginal even for experienced gunners. McIntyre's first shot missed, the tracer visible as it arced over the target Panther and impacted in the tree line beyond. His second shot hit, but struck the Panther's turret at a shallow angle and deflected. The third shot penetrated the glacis plate and the Panther stopped, smoke pouring from its engine deck. Across the ridgeline, other M36 were firing with similar results. Mixed accuracy at extreme range, but enough hits to disrupt the German advance. The Panthers began returning fire, their 75mm guns having slightly better effective range than the American 90mm guns due to superior optics. German rounds struck the slope in front of Burt's position, showering his M36 with dirt and rock fragments. One round passed so close to his turret that he felt the pressure wave, but the exchange favoured the Americans. The M36 were in prepared hull-down positions, presenting minimal target profiles. The German tanks were advancing across open ground, fully exposed. Even at extreme range, the volume of American fire was creating casualties the Germans couldn't sustain. Within 15 minutes, 7 German tanks were burning. The attack stalled, then fell back toward the tree line. Burt counted ammunition expenditure. His crew had fired 23 rounds to achieve 2 confirmed kills and 1 probable. This was the reality of combat at extended range with the M36 F sight, which provided only 3-power magnification and a relatively narrow field of view. Hitting moving targets at 1,800 yards required as much luck as skill. But the M36's ability to engage at these ranges at all meant German forces couldn't close to more favourable distances without accepting prohibitive casualties. The Battle of the Bulge would demonstrate both the M36's potential and the limitations of American tank destroyer doctrine. Over the next month, as German forces pushed deeper into Belgium before being contained and pushed back, M36-equipped battalions would destroy hundreds of German tanks. But they would also discover that the 90mm gun, powerful Rinzide, as it was, couldn't solve every tactical problem. The Tiger II, Germany's newest and heaviest tank, proved largely immune to M36 fire from the front. The Tiger II's frontal armour was 150mm thick, sloped at significant angles. Testing by the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion in December concluded that the M36 90mm gun, with standard M82 ammunition, would theoretically not be able to penetrate Tiger II frontal armour at any range. Engagement was tactically viable only against the Tiger II's side, or rear armour, reverting to exactly the doctrine that the M36 was supposed to overcome. This limitation didn't negate the M36's value. Tiger TIEs were relatively rare, with fewer than 500 produced during the entire war. Panthers and Panzer IVs remained the bulk of German armoured forces, and against those vehicles the M36 was decisively superior to any previous American tank destroyer. But the Tiger II represented a continuing problem. German engineering was producing tanks that exceeded American ability to defeat them frontally, maintaining a technological edge that forced American forces to rely on tactical skill and numerical superiority rather than equipment parity. Captain Burt experienced this directly on January 8, 1945, during operations to reduce the bulge. His company encountered a Tiger II positioned in a prepared defensive position near the town of Born. The German tank was partially concealed in a building foundation, with only its turret and gun visible above the rubble. Range was approximately 900 yards, perfect for the M36. McIntyre fired 3 rounds of M82 armor-piercing ammunition. All 3 hit the Tiger II's frontal turret armor. All 3 failed to penetrate. The German tank returned fire with its 88mm KK 43 gun, a weapon that could penetrate the M36 frontal armor at over 2,000 yards. The first German shot destroyed the M36 next to Burt's position, killing the commander and gunner instantly. The second shot forced Burt to order his crew to withdraw before they became another casualty statistic. The engagement was a harsh reminder that superior firepower was meaningless if you couldn't actually hurt the enemy. Against Tiger Eyes, the M36 required the same flanking tactics that earlier tank destroyers had needed against Panthers. The weapon that was supposed to allow frontal engagement with German heavy armor had encountered a German heavy tank it couldn't defeat frontally. But the Tiger II represented less than 3% of German armor encountered during the Battle of the Bulge. The overwhelming majority of German tanks were Panthers and Panzer IVs, vehicles the M36 could destroy reliably at combat ranges, and against those targets, the 90mm gun was proving devastatingly effective. January 15, 1945. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion's after-action report for the Battle of the Bulge arrived at 1st Army Headquarters. The statistics documented a level of combat effectiveness that exceeded every previous American anti-tank weapon system deployed in the European theatre. Between December 16th and January 15th, M36 from the 703rd had engaged German armour in 47 separate actions. Total enemy vehicles destroyed, 123. The breakdown was precise. 78 Panthers, 31 Panzer IVs, 8 Tigers, 4 Stug DIs, and 2 Tiger Ts. Both Tiger Eyes had been destroyed by flank shots at ranges under 700 yards, confirming that the 90mm gun couldn't defeat their frontal armor but remained effective against side and rear protection. American losses during the same period were sobering but manageable. 9 M36 destroyed in combat, 4 damaged and recovered for repair. Crew casualties were 23 men killed, 41 wounded. Was approximately 13-1 in favor of American forces, a dramatic improvement over the 5-1 ratio that M10-equipped battalions had achieved during similar operations in September and October. More significantly, the report analysed ammunition expenditure. M36 crews were averaging 2,7 rounds per kill against Panthers at ranges between 800 and 1,500 yards. This represented a dramatic improvement in gunnery efficiency compared to the M10's average of 5,4 rounds per kill at shorter ranges. The 90mm gun's superior ballistics, combined with growing crew experience, was creating a weapon system that killed German armour more efficiently with less ammunition expenditure. The muzzle brake problem had been partially resolved in early November, when the first double-baffle muzzle brakes reached European theatre. Installation was prioritised from M36 in active combat zones, including the 703rd. The new muzzle brake redirected propellant gases to both sides of the gun tube, dramatically reducing the forward blast that had obscured gunners' vision after each shot. Sergeant McIntyre test-fired his M36 with the new muzzle brake installed on November 8th. The difference was immediately apparent. The muzzle blast, while still substantial, no longer created the massive forward-directed cloud of smoke and debris that had blinded crews during October's engagements. Visibility through the M10 F sight returned within 1 to 2 seconds after firing, rather than 3 to 4 seconds, allowing gunners to observe impact points and make immediate corrections for follow-up shots. The tactical implications were significant. M36 crews could now engage multiple targets in rapid succession without losing track of the battlefield. During a January 19th engagement near St. Vith, McIntyre destroyed 3 Panthers in 90 seconds, adjusting aim after each shot based on observed impacts. This kind of sustained engagement would have been nearly impossible with the original muzzle configuration. But even with improved muzzle brakes and growing crew proficiency, the M36 couldn't overcome basic physics. The vehicle's armour protection remained fundamentally inadequate against German tank guns. The M36 frontal armour was 57 mm at a 30-degree slope, equivalent to approximately 66 mm of perpendicular protection. This was sufficient to defeat German 20 mm autocannon and small arms fire, but completely ineffective against tank guns. The Panther's 75 mm KK-42 gun could penetrate the M36 frontal armour at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. The Tiger's 88 mm KK-36 could do the same at over 3,000 yards. This meant that in any mutual engagement, German tanks could hurt American tank destroyers long before American forces could reliably hit back. The M36 survival depended entirely on not being shot at, which meant either destroying German tanks before they could return fire, or positioning in ways that prevented German gunners from acquiring targets. American tank destroyer doctrine had always emphasized mobility and positioning over armor protection. The theory was that tank destroyers would occupy prepared positions, engage German armor from ambush, destroy targets before being located, then withdraw to new positions. Static defense was the responsibility of towed anti-tank guns and infantry. Tank destroyers were supposed to be mobile reserves, rushing to threatened sectors to destroy German armor, and then repositioning before German artillery could bracket their positions. This doctrine worked brilliantly when it worked, but failed catastrophically when German forces located tank destroyer positions before the Americans could withdraw. During the Battle of the Bulge, the 703rd lost 9 M36 to direct fire from German tanks that had spotted American positions and engaged before the M36 crews could relocate. In each case, the first German shot destroyed or disabled the American vehicle. The M36 thin armour provided no margin for error. Captain Burt addressed this limitation in his January report to battalion headquarters. The M36 is the best tank killer we've ever had, but it's not a tank. Crews need to understand they cannot survive sustained engagement with German armour. One hit kills us. Our advantage is range and firepower, and we lose both advantages if we allow Germans to spot us before we kill them. Doctrine needs to emphasize first shot kills and immediate displacement after engagement. The distinction was important. American crews, seeing that their M36 could finally hurt German heavy armour, were sometimes tempted to fight like tanks, holding positions and trading shots with enemy vehicles. This invariably resulted in American casualties. The M36 open-topped turret was particularly vulnerable to artillery fragments, and German forces had learned to call for artillery support whenever they encountered American tank destroyers. On January 23rd, M36 from 1st Company was destroyed not by a tank, but by a German 105 mm howitzer firing from indirect fire positions 3 miles away. The artillery shell landed directly in the open turret, killing the entire crew instantly. This was the nightmare scenario tank destroyer crews lived with every day. All the firepower in the world meant nothing if a single artillery fragment could kill everyone inside the vehicle. But for all its vulnerabilities, the M36 had fundamentally changed the tactical calculus of armoured warfare on the Western Front. German armour commanders, who had operated with near impunity during the Normandy campaign, when American forces lacked weapons capable of frontally engaging Panthers, now had to account for the possibility that any advance might encounter M36 capable of destroying their vehicles at extreme range. German tactical doctrine adapted throughout January 1945. Panzer units began emphasizing longer engagement ranges, attempting to engage American forces at distances exceeding 2,000 yards, where even the 90mm gun's accuracy degraded significantly. German defensive positions were prepared with fields of fire extending to 3,000 yards or more, forcing American armor to cross extensive open ground under observation before closing to effective combat range. More significantly, German forces began prioritizing destruction of M36 whenever they were identified. Intelligence assessments correctly identified the 90mm gun as the most serious threat to German armor in the American inventory, and tactical guidance emphasized that M36 should be engaged immediately with all available weapons, including artillery, tank fire, and anti-tank guns. The M36's distinctive tall turret and counterweight bustle made it easily identifiable at long range, marking crews for special attention from German gunners. This created a perverse problem. The better the M36 performed, the more attention German forces paid to destroying them, which increased American casualties among tank destroyer battalions. The weapon system was so effective that it drew fire away from other American units, essentially sacrificing tank destroyer crews to protect infantry and regular armor. Whether this was a worthwhile trade was a question that data couldn't answer. February 1945. With the Battle of the Bulge concluded and German forces pushed back to their starting positions, American forces prepared for the final offensive into Germany proper. The Rhine River crossings were planned for March, and intelligence predicted fierce German resistance using every available tank and assault gun to defend the approaches to the river. The Ordnance Department conducted a comprehensive analysis of M36 combat performance, incorporating data from all battalions that had used the vehicle between October 1944 and February 1945. The report, classified secret and distributed to senior commanders and equipment planners, represented the most thorough assessment of the 90mm gun's anti-tank capabilities available. Total M36 deployed to European theatre through February 1945, approximately 850 vehicles across 14 tank destroyer battalions. Total German armoured vehicles destroyed by M36, 1,423 confirmed kills. The breakdown showed the gun's effectiveness across all German armour types. 891 Panthers, 372 Panzer IVs, 96 Tigers, 43 Tiger Is, and 121 assault guns and tank destroyers. American losses during the same period: 107 M36 destroyed in combat, 42 damaged, and returned to service. Crew casualties: 314 killed, 627 wounded. The overall exchange ratio was approximately 13 vehicles destroyed per M36 lost, with crew survival rate of approximately 68% when vehicles were destroyed, a figure significantly higher than the 42% survival rate for M10 Wolverine crews during similar operations. The report attributed the improved crew survival rate to several factors. The M36's ability to engage German armour at extended range meant fewer close-range penetrations that typically killed entire crews. The open-topped turret, while vulnerable to artillery, actually improved crew survival when vehicles were hit by allowing rapid bailout, and growing tactical proficiency among American crews meant fewer situations where M36 were caught in disadvantageous positions by German forces. But the report's most significant finding addressed the fundamental question that had driven the M36 development. Could American tank destroyers engage German heavy armour frontally at combat ranges? The answer, supported by 4 months of combat data, was unambiguous. Yes, with significant caveats. The 90mm M3 gun, firing M82 armor-piercing ammunition, could reliably penetrate Panther frontal armor at ranges up to 1,500 yards under most conditions. Against Tigers, penetration was reliable at ranges up to 1,000 yards against frontal hull armor, though the Tiger's frontal turret armor required closer ranges or flank shots. Against Panzer IVs, the gun was effective at all practical combat ranges. Standing in the staging area near Magdeburg, Captain Burt understood that he'd witnessed the transformation of American armored doctrine. The M36 represented American industrial capacity applied to a specific tactical problem: how to destroy German heavy armor without accepting prohibitive casualties. The solution wasn't elegant or sophisticated. It was a large gun mounted on a reliable chassis produced in sufficient quantity to equip units where it was needed most, and employed by increasingly skilled crews who learned through combat experience how to maximize the weapon's advantages while compensating for its limitations. The mythology of German tank superiority, which had dominated Allied thinking from North Africa through Normandy, had been decisively challenged by the M36's combat record. German armor wasn't invincible. It was vulnerable to weapons with sufficient penetrating power, employed by crews trained to exploit the weapon's capabilities. The psychological edge Germany had enjoyed, the assumption that German tanks were simply better than anything the Allies could field, had been eroded by 8 months of combat, where American tank destroyers consistently destroyed German vehicles at ranges where German guns were less effective. But mythology dies hard, and even decades after the war, popular perception continued to emphasize German technical superiority. The Panther was remembered as the best medium tank of World War II. The Tiger was legendary for its armor and firepower. These perceptions weren't entirely wrong, but they obscured a more complex reality. German tanks were formidable weapons systems, but they were vulnerable to American weapons when those weapons were properly employed. The M36 proved that doctrine and training mattered as much as raw specifications. The human cost of the M36 program was substantial. Over 800 American tank destroyer crewmen were killed operating M36 between October 1944 and May 1945. Over 1,500 were wounded. Each casualty represented the price of learning how to employ a new weapon system in combat. Mistakes made because training couldn't fully replicate battlefield conditions and tactical situations where even the best equipment couldn't prevent disaster. But those casualties had to be measured against the alternative. Tank Destroyer Battalions equipped with M10 Wolverines during the same period suffered casualty rates nearly 50% higher when engaging comparable German forces. The M36's ability to destroy German armor at extended range translated directly into saved American lives. Every Panther destroyed at 1,200 yards was a Panther that couldn't close to 600 yards and destroy American vehicles with near impunity. Captain Burt's final report to battalion headquarters, submitted on May 10, 1945, attempted to capture lessons learned from 8 months of M36 operations. The 90mm gun is the most effective anti-tank weapon American forces have deployed in this war. It can destroy any German tank except the Tiger II when employed at proper ranges with appropriate tactics. Crew training is critical. The weapon's capabilities exceed earlier tank destroyer guns to such a degree that crews must unlearn doctrine developed for the 3-inch gun and develop new tactical approaches that exploit the 90mm range and penetration. He continued, "The M36 vulnerabilities are significant but manageable. Thin armor requires careful positioning and immediate withdrawal after engagement. Open turret is vulnerable to artillery but allows rapid evacuation when vehicle is hit. Crews that understand these limitations and fight accordingly achieve excellent results. Crews that attempt to fight the M36 like a tank suffer high casualties." The report concluded with recommendations for future tank destroyer development. Any successor to the M36 should maintain the 90mm gun or equivalent firepower while addressing armor protection and crew survivability. The open turret is tactically acceptable, but creates unnecessary casualties from artillery fragments. A closed turret with adequate ventilation would improve crew survivability without sacrificing observation. Improved optical sights with greater magnification would extend effective engagement range beyond current 1,500-yard maximum. These recommendations influenced post-war tank destroyer and tank development. The M36 B2 variant, produced in limited numbers in May 1945, featured armoured covers for the open turret that could be closed during artillery bombardment. The Korean War-era M46 Patton tank incorporated many lessons from M36 operations, including a fully enclosed turret, improved fire control systems, and the 90mm gun as primary armament. The legacy of the M36 Jackson was ultimately about institutional learning. American military procurement in 1942 had failed to anticipate German armor development, leaving American forces equipped with weapons inadequate to defeat Panthers and Tigers. The M36 program represented a mid-war course correction, adapting anti-aircraft weapons to anti-tank roles and deploying them rapidly enough to impact the final year of combat in Europe. But the M36 arrived late. If the weapon had been available in June 1944 during the Normandy campaign, hundreds of American tankers and tank destroyer crewmen might have survived battles they lost because they lacked weapons capable of hurting German armor. The institutional inertia that delayed 90mm gun deployment, the belief that existing 3-inch and 76mm guns would be adequate, cost American lives that could have been saved with better procurement decisions. The final irony of the M36 story is that American military planners originally believed the 90mm gun was overkill for anti-tank use. In 1942, when the program began, Ordnance Department assessments concluded that such a large gun was unnecessary because German tanks didn't require that level of firepower to defeat. This assumption proved catastrophically wrong within 18 months, as Panthers appeared with armor that rendered existing American weapons inadequate. By the time the M36 reached combat in October 1944, what had been dismissed as overkill was barely sufficient to engage the heaviest German armor. The Germans thought the 90mm gun was excessive, another example of American tendency to build weapons larger and heavier than necessary. German technical intelligence assessed the M36 as over-engineered and wasteful of resources, typical of American industrial excess. But when German tank commanders encountered M36 in combat, their assessment changed quickly. The 90mm gun wasn't overkill. It was exactly the weapon needed to defeat German heavy armor at ranges that kept American crews alive. What appeared excessive in theory proved essential in practice, and German forces paid the price for underestimating American engineering capability. The transformation from mockery to respect, from dismissal to fear, from assumed inferiority to demonstrated effectiveness, was complete. The weapon system that began as an anti-aircraft gun became the tank killer that restored balance to armoured warfare on the Western Front. 8 90mm rounds, synchronized through a single gun system mounted on a reliable chassis, delivered destruction that German armor doctrine couldn't counter and German engineering couldn't overcome. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.